Welcome back, Logan. And you know what time it is. So if you're not cozy in your favorite chair, kick up the legs and get ready for some math from your couch. So today what we're going to do is we're going to talk about the quadratic formula. If you have not had a chance to watch that story I sent to you guys, it's like a 25-second video. Please do me a favor, go and watch that. It'll make this next segment, this next piece, make just a little bit more sense. All right, so what we're going to do is we're going to be solving quadratic equations using the quadratic formula. Now, the quadratic formula, the way that I proposed it to you guys with that 25-second video is that it's a story. So we're going to write down that the quadratic formula is x equals, and the story is about this sad boy, a sad boy. And this sad boy is unsure about whether or not he should go to this radical party. All right, the square root sign, also known as the radical sign, this radical party. Now, here's what happens. He gets to the party, and he finds out that, yeah, he is a square. Now, because this boy is a square, he loses out. He loses out on 4 awesome chicks. Now, the last thing we need to remember about this party is all over. It is all over at 2 a.m. And this right here is how I remember the quadratic formula. Some people use a song. I like to use a story. So this formula only works on quadratic equations in standard form. And standard form is ax to the power of 2 plus bx plus c is equal to 0. Now, the first thing you're going to want to do is when you solve a quadratic equation using this formula, you want to have it in standard form. That means x squared first, x second, and then finally the constant term at the very end. And you want to be able to identify a, b, and c. Okay, so let's take a look at our first example, number 1. We're going to solve x squared minus 10x minus 11 is equal to 0. You'll notice that it's already in standard form, so it's set up fairly nicely for you. What next thing I want to do is I want to find a, b, and c. So I'm going to write that down. A is the number in front of the x squared. Now it's not 0, because if it was, then the x squared wouldn't be there. The a is 1 in this scenario. So when you can't see the number, when you see the variable but not the number, we know that there is 1. There is a 1 there. And then b. b is the number that is next to the x, which is negative 10. And c is the constant, negative 11. So what we're going to do is we're going to take the quadratic equation and we're just going to plug them in. Now the way that I plug them in is I tend to just fill them in and do some of the math mentally. For example, this right here, I don't call it negative b. Anytime I'm dealing with formulas, I always call that opposite of b. Now since b is negative 10 in this problem, the opposite of that is just 10. So I'm going to write 10. So I'm not going to write down double negative signs or anything like that. I'm just going to write down 10, the opposite of negative 10. And now it's going to be plus or minus the square root, plus or minus the square root. And since I know what b squared means, it means to multiply the b by itself. So negative 10 times negative 10 comes out to 100. And then I got negative 4 times 1 and negative 11 times. I need to multiply the a and the c. A is 1 and c is negative 11. I can do that mentally. That's just negative 11 right there. So you'll notice that when I use the quadratic formula, I'm going to plug them in, but I'm also going to simplify as I plug them in. Okay, so the next thing is we're going to have 2 times a. Now, a is 1, so I'm just going to say 2 times 1, which comes out to, that's right, 2. And now I can simplify it a little bit further. So we have x equals 10 plus or minus the square root, and then negative 4 and negative 11. Negative 4 times negative 11 is positive 44. So I have 100 plus 44 over 2. And then I can simplify it a tad bit more. We get x equals 10. Oh, that's not a 10, that's an x, sorry. X equals 10 plus or minus the square root of 144 over 2. And then I'll simplify this just one more time. The square root of 144, actually a couple more times, the square root of 144 is 12, so I'm going to get 10 plus or minus 12 over 2. Okay, now comes the most important part that a lot of people mess up on, the plus or minus. What that means is you're going to have 2 answers. So I'm going to break this up into 2 problems. The first problem is going to be my plus problem, 10 plus 12 over 2. And then I'm going to break it up into my second problem, which is my minus problem, 10 minus 12 over 2. This is going to give me 22 over 2, which is 11. And then this one over here is going to give me negative 2 over 2, which comes out to negative 1. So I now have 2 answers. My answers are that x equals negative 1 and 11. All right. Let's take a look at our second problem. Our second example, problem number 2. What we've got is we need to solve 2x to the power of 2 is equal to x plus 1. Now remember, the first step in solving these things is to get it in standard form. And the way I'll do it is I usually just get 0 on the right side, so I'm going to have to get rid of this x. So I'm going to take away the x from both sides. The problem is there's nowhere to take away the x from, so I'm just going to put minus x, kind of just stick it in there. I also have to get rid of that 1, so I'm going to subtract 1. Once again, nothing to really subtract it from, so I'm just going to write minus 1 over there. Notice whatever I do on the right side, negative x, negative 1, I do on the left side. Okay, so the result is going to be 2x to the power of 2 minus x minus 1 is equal to, and all of that cancels out to 0. All right, next, establish a, b, and c. In this problem, a is 2, b is the number that's in front of the x. There's no number there, so it's automatically assumed to be 1. So we have a negative 1 because it's a negative sign, and then c, which is negative 1 again. All right, we set up our equation. X equals the opposite of b, the opposite of b. So instead of writing negative 1, I'm going to do the opposite of that, which is just 1, plus or minus the square root of b squared, okay, of b squared. So I'm going to square that. Negative 1 times negative 1 is, bam, just 1. And then minus 4, and then I need to multiply a times c. 2 times negative 1. So I'm going to go 2 times negative 1, which is negative 2, all over 2 times a. Now, a in this problem is 2, so I'm going to go 2 times 2, which is 4. So I'm going to skip some steps by plugging it in and actually simplifying some of the stuff that I can simplify mentally. All right, we have x equals 1 plus or minus the square root of 1, and that right there is going to come out to 8. So I got 1 plus 8 all over 4. Now I have enough room to simplify over here, so I'm going to do a little bit more simplifying. 1 plus or minus the square root of 1 plus 8 is 9. So I got 1 plus or minus the square root of 9 over 4. Now square root of 9 is 3, so I'm going to say x equals 1 plus or minus 3 over 4. Now remember, we have two possible answers here. Our first answer is going to come from 1 plus 3 over 4. And our second answer comes from 1 minus 3 over 4. Now 1 plus 3 over 4 just comes out to 4 over 4, which is 1. And 1 minus 3 over 4 is negative 2 over 4, or just negative 1 half, which gives me my two answers. X is equal to negative 1 half and 1. All right, moving on to our second example. Our third example. So our third example we have is solve 6x to the power of 2 plus 6, which is equal to 13x. Once again, always get it in standard form when you're using the quadratic formula. I would say anytime you're solving a quadratic, get it in standard form. So we're going to get rid of this 13x. I always like to have the right side equal to 0, so I'm going to subtract the 13x from both sides. The problem is there's nothing to take it away from, so I'm just going to kind of stick it in the middle over there. So we've got 6x to the power of 2 minus 13x plus 6 is equal to 0. All right, next, identify a, b, and c. The quadratic term is 6. The linear term is negative 13, and our constant is 6. Moving on, using the quadratic formula, x equals the opposite of b, so I'm going to get 13 over here. The opposite of negative 13 is just 13, plus or minus the square root of b squared. I got to multiply that negative 13 times negative 13. Hopefully you remember all your perfect squares up to 256. And this gives us 169 minus 4 times 6a times 6c. So we're going to multiply the a and the c. 6 times 6 comes out to 36 over 2 times a. 2 times 6, which is 12. Okay, so saving a little time just by simplifying some of the math we can do mentally. All right, so now we have 13 plus or minus the square root of 169 minus, let's see, that comes out to 120, 24, 144 minus 144 over 12. All right, almost done, getting closer. We have 13 plus or minus the square root. 169 minus 144 comes out to 25. over 12. All right, so that's 13. So we have x equals 13 plus or minus 5 over 12. We now need to break it up into two possible answers here. Our first one is going to be 13 plus the 5 over 12. And our second one is going to be the 13 minus the 5 over the 12. Now 13 plus 5 comes out to 18, so we got 18 over 12. Both can be divided by 6. 6 goes into 18 3 times. 6 goes into 12 2 times. So my first solution is going to be 3 over 2. And then over here I have a 13 minus 5, which is 8. And we get 8 over 12. Both can be divided by 4. 4 goes into 8 2 times. And 4 goes into 12 3 times. So my two answers are x equals 2/3 and 3/2. All right, go ahead and take a look at the questions for the assignment. Do the best you can. The first couple, just get it in standard form, and then tell me what A, B, and C are. And then the last couple of problems, you're going to practice the quadratic formula. The second part to this assignment, so Thursday's part to the assignment, or the second day, is going to be just doing more of this, more practice, but also taking a look at possible, some potential no solution answers or no real solutions. If you have questions, go ahead and email me or drop by office hours, and I'm sure I can help you out. Hope to see or talk to you soon. All right, take it easy.